Imagine being ripped from your homeland, your family, your future, and carried hundreds of miles into the capital of the greatest empire on earth. You are young, you are powerless, and the king who rules over you can destroy your life with a single command. But then something happens. The empire discovers that the prisoner can see what kings cannot. He can interpret dreams. He can understand mysteries. And when powerful men demand that he abandon his god, he refuses. Not once, not twice, again and again. And eventually, that refusal will lead him into a pit filled with lions. But the lions are not the most terrifying thing Daniel will face. His greatest battle will be against something far larger. The belief that earthly kingdoms last forever. Babylon will rise. Persia will rise. Greece will rise. Rome will rise. Kings will build monuments believing their power is permanent. But Daniel will see something different. He will see kingdoms fall, and a kingdom that does not. This is the story of Daniel, the exile, the interpreter of dreams, the man in the lion's den, and the prophet of visions. Before Daniel became famous in Babylon, he was simply a young Judean. The book of Daniel tells us that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against Jerusalem and carried captives away. Daniel was among them. The precise details of his childhood are unknown. The Bible does not give us a complete biography. It does not tell us the names of his parents. It does not describe his childhood home. And it does not tell us exactly what he felt when Jerusalem disappeared behind him. But we know what exile meant. A homeland was gone. A familiar world had been replaced by a foreign empire. And Daniel was taken into the royal environment of Babylon. According to the biblical narrative, he and other young Judeans were selected for training and service in the king's court. This is where Daniel's personal tragedy begins. Not with a battlefield death, not with a dramatic execution, but with displacement. He had lost control over his own life, and Babylon intended to reshape him. His education, his language, his identity, even his name. The empire could change what people called him. Could place him inside a foreign palace. It could surround him with foreign gods. But there was one thing Babylon could not easily take: his conviction. Daniel and his companions were given food and wine from the king's table. To many people, refusing royal food would have seemed absurd. The king had power. The young captives had none. But Daniel chose another path. He requested permission not to defile himself with the king's provisions. It was a small decision, but small decisions often reveal character. Daniel was not yet standing before lions. He was not interpreting the future. He was simply deciding who he would be when nobody expected him to matter. The court tested him, and Daniel remained faithful. Then something extraordinary happened. Daniel developed a reputation, not because he commanded an army, not because he inherited a throne, but because he possessed wisdom. The king's world was filled with scholars, advisors, priests, and specialists. Yet Daniel repeatedly emerged when impossible questions appeared. And then came the dream. Nebuchadnezzar had seen something terrifying. An enormous image, a head of gold, a chest of silver, bronze, iron, and feet partly of iron and clay. The king demanded an explanation. But there was a problem. He wanted his wise men to tell him both the dream and its meaning. They could not. The king ordered them killed. Daniel was now facing a crisis he had not created. And suddenly, the young exile was standing between a furious emperor and death. Daniel prayed, and according to the biblical account, the mystery was revealed to him in a night vision. He returned to the king, and instead of claiming the power for himself, Daniel said that the answer came from God. The prisoner had become the interpreter, and the empire had no choice but to listen. Daniel explained the enormous statue. Different metals represented successive kingdoms. The message was larger than Babylon. The king who believed his empire was permanent was being shown that kingdoms have limits. Gold, silver, bronze, iron. Then the image was struck by a stone. Collapsed. Dust replaced greatness. The meaning was unmistakable. Human power does not last forever. Daniel's interpretation placed him in a remarkable position. The exile had become a trusted advisor. But success created a new danger, because when a foreigner rises inside a powerful court, people begin to notice, and not everyone is happy. Nebuchadnezzar's court becomes increasingly dangerous. The stories of Daniel and his companions repeatedly return to the same question. Who deserves ultimate loyalty? The king? The empire? Or God? This is where Daniel's story becomes more than a tale about survival. It becomes a story about conscience. Nebuchadnezzar establishes a gigantic golden image. Everyone is commanded to bow. Music fills the air. Officials fall to the ground. But Daniel's companions refuse. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Pronunciation: Shadrach, Shadrach,
Meshach, Meshach.
Abednego, Abednego. They are condemned to a furnace. The flames become the visual symbol of the entire story. The empire says, bow. Faith says, stand. The furnace burns. But according to Daniel chapter 3, the three men survive. The king is confronted by something he cannot explain. The empire's machinery of punishment has failed. And Daniel learns a lesson that will return later. Faithfulness does not always prevent danger. Sometimes it takes you directly into it. Nebuchadnezzar himself receives another disturbing dream. This time, Daniel must tell the king something even more dangerous. The mighty ruler will be humbled. The great tree will fall. The king's pride will become his weakness. Daniel does not celebrate the prediction. He warns him, renounce your sins by doing what is right. The story presents Daniel not as a political opportunist, but as someone willing to tell power the truth. And eventually the narrative turns toward another ruler, Belshazzar, a royal feast, gold and silver vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Wine, celebration, confidence. The king believes Babylon is secure. Then, a hand appears, writing on the wall, words nobody understands.
Звездица, звездица мене. Мене.
Tekel, Parson. Asterisk, asterisk. Daniel is summoned. And the message is devastating. The kingdom has been weighed and found wanting. That night, Babylon falls. The empire changes. Babylon gives way to Persian rule. The book of Daniel introduces a ruler called Darius the Mede, followed by the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is also where historical caution becomes important. Modern historians and biblical scholars debate the identity of Darius the Mede and several chronological details in Daniel. But within the story itself, Daniel survives another regime change. And that is extraordinary. Kings change. Empires change. Daniel remains. He becomes one of the kingdom's senior officials. His enemies watch him. They search for corruption. They search for incompetence. They search for anything they can use. They find nothing. So they attack the one thing they believe cannot be separated from him: his faith. They convince the king to issue a decree. For 30 days, no one may pray to any god or human except the king. The punishment? Death. Daniel hears about the decree. He understands exactly what it means. He could hide. He could wait 30 days. He could pray in secret. Instead, he goes home, opens his windows toward Jerusalem, and prays 3 times a day, just as he had done before. His enemies are waiting. They catch him. The king is trapped by his own decree. He does not want Daniel to die. But the law cannot be changed. Daniel is brought before him. And the king says, according to the biblical account, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The stone is placed over the entrance. The king seals it. Daniel disappears into darkness. Silence. Inside the den, lions. Darkness. Stone walls. No army.
No weapon. No escape.
Only faith. This is the moment the entire story has been building toward. The young exile who lost his homeland now faces death because he refused to stop praying. Outside the den, the king cannot sleep. He refuses entertainment. He fasts. At dawn, he runs to the den. But the lion's den is not the end. It is only the beginning of Daniel's strangest experiences. The second half of the book changes dramatically. The court stories give way to visions, dreams, beasts, angels, judgment, future kingdoms. Daniel sees 4 great beasts rising from a turbulent sea: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and a terrifying 4th beast unlike the others. The imagery is enormous, nightmarish, political, cosmic. Daniel is no longer simply interpreting someone else's dream. Now he is the one seeing visions, and the message returns to the same central idea. Earthly kingdoms rise, and earthly kingdoms fall. Then Daniel sees something different: a heavenly court, judgment, and a figure described as one like a son of man. The vision moves beyond individual kings, beyond Babylon, beyond Persia, beyond political power. The message becomes one of ultimate justice. Daniel's later visions become increasingly complex. Wars between kingdoms, political rulers, oppression, desecration, suffering, and eventually, deliverance. Modern scholarship commonly understands the later visions as reflecting the crisis surrounding Antiochus IV Epiphanes and the persecution of Jews in the 2nd century BCE, although religious traditions interpret the prophecies in different ways. That distinction matters, because Daniel has been interpreted for centuries. Some readers see fulfilled prophecy. Others see apocalyptic literature written during persecution to give suffering people hope. And many believers see both historical meaning and continuing spiritual significance. But regardless of interpretation, one message remains powerful. When the world appears controlled by violent rulers, Daniel says their power is temporary. When people are forced to choose between conscience and safety, Daniel says faithfulness matters. When an empire appears unstoppable, Daniel says, no empire is eternal.